So if you thought it was weird that I only had one rabbit and one bottomless and no maxes and other weird things missing from my library, your suspicions are confirmed. Those cards were in fact in my deck when I did my library profile video. So now I'm going to go through my March 1st Fire Fist deck profile. This is the build, more or less, that I will be running at the Houston Regional this coming Saturday, March 2nd, 2013. So it will be the first regional of the format in Texas, and Fire Fists and Mono Mermail will definitely be the top contenders for this upcoming tournament. And so I'm going to go into both my deck choices, as well as explanations for how those choices address the Mermail matchup, which I think is the most important matchup that you should be preparing for when you construct a Fire Fist deck. So, looking at monsters, we have 2 Rescue Rabbit, 3 Werewolf, 2 Tengu, 3 Bear, 2 Gorilla, and 1 Dragon. The most controversial thing about my monster lineup is that there's only 1 Dragon. The reason I decided on this is because Dragon often draws dead, not very often, but occasionally, but the main reason is that the second Dragon is often sided out. And so I figure if there's a second card that I always side out in every game 2 and 3, I may as well just main deck that 1 copy and not even run the second copy altogether. On top of that, I find that Dragon's not really necessary to outright win during any given game. It will save you a few games, but not so often that you really need the second copy. So overall, I don't really miss the second copy. Now for newer players, they might be wondering why Reborn Tengu is in this deck, and why Gene Warped Werewolf and 2 Rabbit are in this deck, but no Vorse Raider and Deck Devastation Virus. This is a topic that's been beaten to death, and I wouldn't really contribute to discussion by going over the reasons for this. This is basically the standard lineup, and the standard way to play this deck most efficiently, as has been agreed upon by the community, and you can always look up on forums like Duelist Grounds for more specific explanations for why this is the case. But basically the general consensus right now is that Vorse Raider is in fact bad for the deck. Okay, continuing on with spells. So it probably looked really suspicious that I didn't have any Tenkis and any Tensus in my card library earlier. That's because they were, once again, in my Fire Fist deck. So 3 Tenki is the standard because it is the very best spell in your deck besides Trinity. It searches out your monsters. And since the monster count is so low, playing 3 Tenki is, in a sense, like playing 3 more monsters. Pot of Duality is a card that I didn't initially run, but the community all seem to agree that this card belonged in the deck. And I've come to realize that it's pretty standard in this deck. The theory behind it is that this deck does not depend on special summons. In fact, its special summons it's quite flexible in the way it special summons, and you can easily go a turn without special summoning. On top of that, it's not a heavily combo-based deck, so Pot of Duality, the odds are that Pot of Duality will dig into something useful, a standalone useful card at any given time. So it's very useful, though I do still side it out games 2 and 3 very frequently. And the main reason being because I don't like revealing my side deck cards to my opponent when I play Pot of Duality, so I usually side both copies out. Tensu is played at 2, because if you play 1 copy, you're going to easily run out of Bear and Gorilla targets early on, and Tensu is just a really good card to open with. You can do all kinds of neat things. In some exceptional situations, you can use Tensu and Rescue Rabbit to establish a turn 1 board involving Shockmaster. So Tensu is a really solid card, but I wouldn't run 3 because without the aid of monsters, the card is simply a -1 in your hand. Forbidden Lance is run at 2. 3 copies is by no means deficient. If someone else advocates running 3 copies, I would totally agree. I just prefer to run 2 at this moment. Lance is very critical in the Fire Fist mirror match. So if there's more Fire Fist prevalent in your local meta, then Forbidden Lance at 3 is by no means a bad choice. Lastly, we have Trinity. Trinity is Trinity, and it's very good. There might be some very obscure suggestions out there on the internet to not play Heavy Storm in this deck, but Heavy by all means belongs in this deck. It's just a blowout card that establishes a victory. I currently run 3 MST because I side the 3rd MST in against almost every matchup, and I figured if I side a card in almost all the time, I may as well just main deck that card. Now 2 MST is also fine, and I would not disagree with someone who chose to run 2 MST instead. Pretty much the same idea goes for 3 Lance. Now, as you proceed to the trap lineup, we have 3 Fiendish Chain. Now, what I anticipate that more and more people are going to find is that Fiendish Chain is the best unlimited trap card in the format. It's really good in that it can be used in the battle phase, the way Dimensional Prison and Mirror Force can, and it can also be used in response to summons, the way that Bottomless Trap Hole or Solemn Warning can. So Fiendish Chain is a very versatile card. Now, what does Fiendish Chain not do that the aforementioned cards do? The aforementioned cards are removal cards. They actually remove the monster from the field. Fiendish Chain's one drawback compared to those removal cards is that it doesn't remove monsters. But the versatility that you gain to compensate for the lack of removal is just so good that it's worth running the maxed out playset of this card right now. I play 2 Tensin because Tensin is a very nice damage step booster, and it can be searched out via Dragon or Tiger King, and 2 Tensin is just a solid ratio for that card. I play 2 Mirror Force. Before, I had tested out Compulsory Evacuation Device in the wind-up format, but since wind-ups are more and more irrelevant now, and in fact in March they will be completely not Tier 1, there's no reason to really run Compulsory Evacuation Device at all. Especially considering that I'm focusing my build, as well as my side deck, on countering the Mermail matchup. It's a very, very difficult matchup, and you need cards like Mirror Force or Dimensional Prison to stop Marksman and other big monsters. Now, why Mirror Force over Dimensional Prison? It's actually kind of a funny story because half a year ago, if you had told me that the Mirror Force would one day become a better card than Dimensional Prison, I would have thought you were crazy. But it in fact has. At this current time, Mirror Force is a better card than Dimensional Prison because the number of monsters in the whole card pool of the meta game right now that actually lose to Prison but don't lose to Mirror Force is very small. We're talking about very obscure cards like Elemental Hero The Shining, Neos Alias sometimes, Light Pulsar Dragon sometimes. And so the situations where Dimensional Prison is a better card than Mirror Force have become more and more uncommon and more obscure. And for that reason, Mirror Force has become the gold standard for decks like these and has by far triumphed over Dimensional Prison for spots in the main deck. Bottomless Trap Hole has been the best summon response card in the game up until Warning was released. And apart from Warning, it still is the best summon response card in the game. It's very useful, it addresses almost every card in the meta, and it's just stable to have at 2. Before I ran 3 Fiendish, I ran 2 Fiendish and 2 Solemn Warning, but since Warning is now down to 1, I've converted that second Warning into the 3rd Fiendish Chain. But even if Solemn Warning were still at 2, I would still run that 3rd Fiendish Chain because it's that good. Solemn Judgment, it protects your pushes as well as protects your field, and it just does all kinds of neat tricks. And this card is just a staple in a stun deck such as Fire Fists. I'll save that for last. 1 Tenkin. Tenkin is a themed Forbidden Lance for Fire Fists, and what's really neat about it is that it can stop cards like Valor, which have almost no other counter in the entire game. And it can stop summon response traps like Bottomless Trap Hole and Torrential Tribute, and it can chain to Fiendish Chain when you summon your Tiger King. So it does all kinds of neat things. On top of that, it's tutorable via Dragon or via Tiger King, so it just does all kinds of neat things, and it's really solid to have at 1 in the deck. However, the most controversial decision in my trap lineup, and actually the most controversial decision in this entire deck, would probably be the 1 copy of Starlight Road. If you talk to veteran players and really good duelists, they would all probably say that Starlight Road is one of the weakest cards in the Fire Fist deck. It's really iffy to include in the deck, but at the same time, its effect is so good that when you resolve it, you are very likely to win that game in just a few turns. So Starlight Road is a card that I would deem situational, but also very powerful. On top of that, it punishes players who are bad at reading, and it punishes bad players in general. And that's pretty useful because most of the players that you play early round in a regional or a YCS are not going to be players who can make great reads or anything. So for that reason, I've included the card Starlight Road for now, but I do concede that this is a card that can potentially be dropped from the deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we have one Cowboy, because burning for that last damage is very relevant, and Cowboy can crash with anything that's 3,000 or less attack. We have two Abyss Dweller, because the Mermail matchup truly is horrible, and it should be the most significant matchup that you consider when you build your deck. We have, well, we'll get back to this card. We have Steelswarm Roach, because Agents and Chaos Dragons are still relevant. We have Lightning Chidori, which is not a great card in the sense that it's very seldom summoned, but still possible to summon, and so we run that card. Diamond Direwolf, it does some neat things in tandem with Reborn Tengu. It's by no means a great card, but it's still an okay card and worth running for now. We have Black Ship of Corn, which is a Zen Mines Slayer, and just a really nice burn card that can easily finish off the game. We have Papal-Imperative, which instantly kills Spirit Reaper in the likes, and also just punishes defensive plays in general. We have two Tiger Kings, which is the heart and soul of the extra deck. They are the most common Xyz play that you will make. We have number 16 Shockmaster, because it's not very difficult to summon three monsters in this deck, and Shockmaster can produce soft locks that absolutely guarantee that you're going to win the game. Gemknight Pearl, because it's the biggest rank 4 and can run over anything that's 26 or less attack. And Stardust Dragon for what Starlight Road does. Now, when it comes to the extra, a lot of players run Ally of Justice Catastor, and that's if they main or side effect Veiler. I do not disagree with that decision, and I think that Catastor is a solid choice for the extra deck. Because as of this time, which is just at the start of the March 2013 format, the extra deck space in the Fire Fist is not particularly tight. Now, what is the 15th card? I originally ran Utopia, but in much testing and theorizing, I've realized something about the card Utopia that I also realized when I was playing Windups last format, and that is that it simply does not belong in the deck. As was the case with Windups, there is almost no situation where summoning Utopia is the correct play. Now, of course, you can make the argument that you summon Utopia one time and you use its effect, and it eventually paid off. Well, even if you did that, it doesn't mean that what you did was the right play. You know, what it means is that you took a wild guess, and it just happened to luck happened to land your way. But as far as I can tell, I've never seen an opponent summon Utopia against me in recent times where Utopia was the right play on his part, and I've never had a situation on my own side where summoning Utopia was the best move that I could make at any given moment. And so basically there's almost always a better alternative than summoning Utopia. And as far as beat sticks go, Gemknight Pearl is superior anyway. So that leaves the question of what the 15th card should be. Well, if Daigusto Emerald were legal, that 15th card would be Daigusto Emerald. But since it's not right now, I would say that the 15th card should be a second Maestroke. This card is a killer in the mirror match. It can get past those sneaky traps like Tenzin. It can get past any shenanigans they might be pulling on you with Forbidden Lance. And it just gets past all kinds of things. It gets past Mirror Force. Dimensional Prison and Compulsory Evacuation Device aren't even commonly played right now. So you can really depend on Maestroke to put in a lot of work in the mirror. And for that reason, I would highly advocate running 2 copies of Maestroke. And I don't have the second copy. Now, as far as the future goes for the extra deck, the space, as I've said, is not tight right now. And if better rank 4 cards came out in the future, the first cards that I would drop from the extra deck are the cards I summon the least, which would be Chidori and Papal-Imperative. And if for some crazy reason more than 2 really good rank 4s came out, then I would next probably drop the Diamond Direwolf. Okay, so we've been through the main deck with all the monsters, spells, and trap explanations. We've been through the extra deck. We've talked about what cards were standard and what cards were meta calls and what cards are borderline. And lastly, we have one more section to talk about. And this is the part with the most versatility and the most customizable component of any given deck, and that is the side deck. So the side deck that I currently run for Fire Fists has two goals. The first is to be general. That is, I want to play as general cards as possible that can address multiple matchups. The second principle that I keep is that I want to focus on the Mermail matchup. The Mermail matchup is very difficult in the hands of a good player. While not all water players are good, and you can easily beat out most of them via skill alone, ones of Mermail players who are very skilled will be very difficult to beat. And that is because their deck is so versatile. For example, if you have Dimensional Fissure up, you may stop their plays to pitch for Mermail bosses like Abyss Teus and Abyss Megalo and Abyss Lead, but that's not going to stop a Diva play, for instance. Or let's say you have a card like Soul Drain out. Well, Soul Drain might negate the graveyard effects that they try to use to search out stuff or pop stuff, but at the same time you have to consider that Soul Drain uses up one of your resources as well. And again, it doesn't address cards like Deep Sea Diva, it doesn't even address Megalo for that matter. So the first thing I found about the Mermail matchup is that there are situations where they absolutely have to special summon twice in the same turn. And because they have to do that at times just to stay alive, I've boosted up my 2 maxis to 3 maxis in the side. This card is probably the most narrow card that I side, in the sense that I wouldn't side it for any other deck but Mermails. That is with the exception of certain tier 2 decks that are not as relevant, such as Six Samurai and Windups. But for the most part, Maxi is my most narrow side deck card because it only is meant for one tier 1 deck. Okay, moving along, we have 2 Snowman Eater. Snowman Eater is a very solid stun card. It has high defense and it pretty much ensures that you win the Rabbit matchup. In the past several Rabbit matches that I've played, I've only dropped 1 game out of many matches. Basically, during any game where I do draw Snowman Eater at all, as long as I play my cards correctly, I win that game. As for Effect Veiler, I'm going for 1 copy instead of 2 for the mirror match, because Effect Veiler is a card that you can overdraw, and if you overdraw on hand traps, it can leave you with no way to really establish a win condition of your own. Effect Veiler is also for obscure matchups such as Windups or Insectors. The Fossil Dyna is for Six Samurai and for Rabbit because it answers Lagia, and it also answers huge explosive plays on the part of the Six Samurai player should you go second, but it's also useful going first as well. Okay, so as we continue our side deck discussion, we have 3-Dimensional Fissure. Okay, so the question is, why Dimensional Fissure, why 3 copies? Dimensional Fissure, it's for the Mermail matchup, of course, as I've emphasized strongly before, that we're trying our best to take care of that Mermail matchup. But the problem is, it has the same weakness as Soul Drain in the sense that it does not deal with Deep Sea Diva. But the reason 3-Dimensional Fissure is superior to any number of Soul Drain is because Dimensional Fissure answers more decks and more potential plays that a Mermail player can make within that one particular matchup. Soul Drain can negate a Dragoon Search. Soul Drain can negate a Marksman pop. But you have to consider that these peripheral effects that you're negating are not the main play that's going on. Soul Drain does not do anything when they summon the actual Megalo. So when Megalo hits the field, or when Abyss Teus hits the field, they get that big beat stick, and they get a search effect. If they dropped Megalo on you, then they're going to search a Sphere or a Squall. If they dropped Abyss Teus on you, they're going to search for a level 4 or lower Mermail monster, which could be a Goond or a Lind, or even a Pike. So they have far too many options against your Soul Drain.
So for that reason, I think Dimensional Fissure is better for the Mermail matchup. On top of that, Dimensional Fissure addresses other decks that Soul Drain does not address. Basically, anything that doesn't need graveyard effects to activate in the graveyard, but still need the graveyard itself, will be weakened by Dimensional Fissure. Whereas Soul Drain won't be relevant in those matchups. On top of this, Dimensional Fissure activates the turn that you play it, and that's one of the benefits that it's had over Macrocosmos over the years, is that you can just activate it the very turn you draw it. I mean, it's kind of like the same principle behind why MST is a better card than Dust Tornado. And for the same reason, Dimensional Fissure has that advantage over Soul Drain, and it has that advantage over Macrocosmos. Okay. As we move on, 2 Night Beam is, at this point in time, at the start of the format, players would call this choice tech right now. But I am convinced that as the format shapes up, it will become very apparent that this card is standard. I believe this card is very standard in the side deck. Maybe it might even make its way to the main deck eventually. And the reason I say this is because if you consider what game 2s and 3s are like for Fire Fists versus almost any deck, it's full of chainable cards. If we look at the Mermail matchup, we're talking about Spheres, we're talking about Squalls, we're talking about Overworked possibly, Dust Tornado for sure, MST for sure. Night Beam takes care of all of that. Now, if you consider that sometimes you'll have a face down and your opponent will have a face down, and that face down may very well be MST, and you want to make a push on your turn. So if you were holding MST instead of Night Beam, you would MST their MST, and they would chain their MST and hit your face down. And so you would go -1 from that play, but you had to make it. It was still the correct play because you had to do a push or else you lose. So Night Beam addresses that problem by saying, hey, they can't chain that card. So if they already have that MST set, then you can clear it just in case it was a real back row, and go ahead and make your push safely. And by that same token, if that card weren't MST and it was actually a real card, then you've still taken care of it. It's done the same job as MST. So if that card is Bottomless, Mourning, Fiendish, Night Beam is still doing the job it's supposed to do. Now, now that's not to say, well, that's also like not to exclude those side deck cards that are so nasty against Fire Fist matchup. We're talking about Overworked, we're talking about Dust Tornado, we're talking about the third MST that most decks will side in for you. So all that adds up, and it all counts. And Night Beam does an excellent job of addressing all of those things.
So the last spell in our side deck lineup is Soul Taker. Now, since the format's changed a lot over these past 6 months, but I feel like Soul Taker is still a very relevant card. Not as relevant as it was, say, last summer during Nationals format, but still quite relevant. Soul Taker is most important in matchups where the opponent is playing a type of game where he needs to protect a key monster, keep it on the field, and last for a turn. A simple example of this would be Inzectors. Inzectors are all about playing Protect the Centipede game. So they'll summon that centipede, try to go off. If you somehow can stop them, their goal is to keep that centipede on the board. So on your turn, what you would the logical thing to do would be to say attack that centipede, right? And that's when Inzector players play Threatening Roar. Well, Soul Taker deals with that because after your battle phase, you get a second chance at clearing that centipede off the board. Soul Taker is your main phase 2 opportunity to clear a centipede. Of course, there is always the end phase Call of the Haunted and what have you, but barring those exceptions, Soul Taker is a great card for main phase 2 follow-up plays when your battle phase play fails. Now, Inzectors is just the example that I use, but there are many other relevant examples. The most primary one being the Fire Fist Mirror match. Because in the Mirror match, if your opponent is playing a kind of game where he's trying to play Protect the Bear, or Protect the Gorilla, or Protect the Dragon, then you're counting on your bear effects to get rid of their monsters. Now, should your bear fail, you're counting on the battle phase to get rid of their monsters. And should your battle phase fail, then your opponent has effectively won. Well, in games 2 and 3, Soul Taker addresses that weakness and gives you yet a third option for clearing that monster. so that your opponent's goal of playing Protect the Bear will become that much more of an ineffective strategy and that much more delicate. Soul Taker is a great card which throws your opponent's plan off balance. It clears away that one monster that they're trying to ride to victory, and it gives you a shot at following up a failed battle phase play, or the main phase too. And with Fiendish Chain being played so prominently right now, we're definitely going to need those main phase 2 second chance salvage plans with Soul Taker. Now, the last card I'll talk about is Mind Crush. As of now, this is the only trap that I'm siding. I don't think it will be the only trap I side all format, but at the current time it is the only trap that I side. Mind Crush is very beautiful because, just to start with, it's a chainable. It's a normal trap card that has no activation conditions. Well, it does have one, which is to declare one card name. And so it effectively has no real cost, no activation conditions. As long as you have one card in your hand, you can activate Mind Crush. Now, well, you and your opponent has one card in your hand. Now, so just being chainable alone is really powerful. In fact, just the other day, I was able to chain Mind Crush to an MST, so that clearly translated into lots of advantage generated with just one card. Now, Mind Crush's applications are so broad right now that it's become so playable. I don't know whether Konami knew this when they put the card to 3 for the upcoming format. I'm hesitant to give them that much credit, so I think it might have just been coincidence that Mind Crush is now at 3, but in any case, Mind Crush is very relevant right now. In fact, it's more relevant this month than it has been in the entire past year. The reason being that Mermails, Mono Mermails, and Fire Fists are the two top tier 1 decks right now. And both decks are absolutely wrecked by this card if you play it at the right moment. In the case of Fire Fist, you respond to the resolution of Tenki by calling their bear. They lose a bear, maybe they lose a second copy if they have it in hand. Even if they don't lose that second copy, you've traded 1 for 1 with a bear, and you have the information of their entire hand. Now, it's hard to put a price on information. You know, when you gather the information of your opponent's hand and know every card in it, you can't really say whether that was a +1 or a +2. It's hard to really quantify that kind of thing. But in any case, there's no doubt that information is very valuable in this game. And that's easily seen in the example of Trap Dust Shoot. Trap Dust Shoot was staple in everyone's deck a year ago. And that card quickly got banned for the way that if you opened it first turn, you flat out won, partially because of the monster you set back with Dust Shoot, but also partially because you gained information, and information is such a powerful resource in the hands of a strong player. In the same way, Mind Crush is an unlimited trap card you can play 3 copies of that has a similar benefit as Trap Dust Shoot in the way that you gain information. Okay, so besides the Fire Fist matchup, there's also the Mermail matchup. When they pitch cards for Megalo, Ateus, or whatever else, you chain Mind Crush, call the monster they're trying to summon, and they flat out lose that monster. And the great thing about it is, it ducks under so many effects. When I say duck under effects, I mean like things that you can normally respond to if your monster's on the field. Like say, you try to bottomless their Megalo, they can still, I don't know, Lance. You try to Fiendish Chain, they can MST. Mind Crush has no weaknesses like that. It's not a summon response card. Rather, it responds to a card in hand that's trying to be summoned. So when you Mind Crush a Battle Fader or Mind Crush an Abyss Megalo, they're not going to run any commonly played cards that can actually deal with that. In fact, there are 0 cards that can deal with that. The Lance is not going to save them. And, you know, it's becoming more and more common for Mono Mermail players to run Forbidden Lance. But Lance is just simply not going to save them from a Mind Crush. Now, you might argue that they'll still be pitching 2 cards that will generate advantage for them, such as Dragoons or Marksman or what have you. And that may very well be the case, and it's a risk that you will have to take. But on the plus side, they're not getting their Abyss Megalo or Abyss Lead effect when they drop that card, or Abyss Teus. And so they're not searching, and they're losing their big beat stick. So whatever plan they had for that turn, it's severely dampened by one successful Mind Crush call. And besides Fire Fist and Mono Mermail, many other decks right now have strategies that revolve around giving your opponent information. And so when you play this, almost any time you activate it, you basically know what your opponent has. You don't have to blind guess. And that's why Mind Crush is so relevant right now. It's because it's so easy to activate and just know what your opponent has. Most decks that are competitive provide prime opportunities for you to make successful calls with Mind Crush. Now, the card does have some weaknesses in the sense that you're not always setting to back row. And so if Mind Crush is the only face down that you set, and your opponent does that Megalo play or that Abyss play, and you call it, and you look at their hand and you see they have a follow-up play, then you're in a lot of trouble. Because it's not a card like Fiendish Chain, which I cannot praise enough right now, because you can hold it off until your opponent has dropped their whole hand, and you know for sure what they're going to do, and then Fiendish Chain in the battle phase. Or a card like Mirror Force that also does something similar to that. Rather, Mind Crush basically tips your hand to the opponent if it's your only face down set. Because once you Mind Crush their stuff, and if they happen to have one more card for that additional push, like a second Megalo or Abyss play, then you're basically out for that battle phase. But it is a risk worth taking, just because the odds that that your successful call will stop them for the entire duration of the turn is very high. The reason I don't run 2 at the moment, but would consider it in the future, is that I don't want to draw 2 copies of this card in the same hand. But even with that improbable possibility considered, it still may be worthwhile to side 2 of this card, just because it's so easy right now to make successful calls with Mind Crush.